John 5, 8-9. Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. The Pharisees, ever vigilant to arise to the defense of the Sabbath, were watching. Welcome to 10-Minute Bible Study, wherein we are studying the Gospel of John in 10-minute, easily digestible bites 5 times a week. John chapter 5, verses 9b to 10. Now that day was the Sabbath, so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to take up your bed." These Pharisee guys were indeed rather strange. They didn't seem to get it. A guy who had been an invalid for years and years, now taking up his bed and walking, absolutely awe-inspiring. And yet all they could think about was how he was breaking their Sabbath laws. I say their Sabbath laws because they're not the laws of God. They're additional laws concerning the Sabbath, not found in Scripture, but rather came about as the opinions of many rabbis, starting in the years of the Babylonian captivity, about 589 BC. On that time in the captivity, everyone came, or the Babylonians came down and grabbed a huge portion of the people and brought them up to live in Babylon. And at the same time, the temple was destroyed, and they could no longer make sacrifices. And up to that time, the worship of Israel was focused on the temple and sacrifices. When they became unable to do that, it switched over to the synagogue and the study of the Torah. That was their new practice. Rabbis and other scholars rose in prominence. Of course, when you got so many scholars focusing in on things, the chances of going off the page increases, because that's just the nature of things. The greatest temptation for any scholar is to think that he's figured out the answer to everything. And they try to explain everything. Usually, when they explain it, they end up killing whatever it is they explained. During this period of the Babylonian captivity, the theory was that God must have given Moses more detailed explanations on how to keep the Sabbath that never made it into the books that Moses wrote, especially when it came to the 10 Commandments. These extra instructions were to be revealed later by the various rabbis, whose voices would come together and be known as the oral law, or as some sort of oral law. It was said to be a never-ending chain of oral tradition from one generation until the next. The oral law was committed to writing about 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem. And again, that was a significant existential threat to Judaism. And they thought they had to write down all of these oral law from the rabbis, because that, they thought, was the essence of Judaism. That, for them, at this point in their history, was more important than was the Scripture itself. The gathering of the rabbis' words was called the Mishnah, and compiled in about the year 200 AD to form what was called the Talmud, a book that contains the opinions of respected rabbis from the past. Here's a picture of it for you to look at. And it is your basic Talmud, and you'll notice that it has writings around the perimeter and writings in the center. The stuff around the perimeter is stuff that was written later as comments about what was said in the middle. Pretty awesome, I think, the way they put this all together. And this book has 2,771 double-sided pages. So it's a pretty large body of work. This is the basic Talmud. Here's an excerpt from it on keeping the Sabbath, and it'll give you a flavor of the kind of stuff that's in there. If a man extinguishes a lamp on the night of the Sabbath for fear of the Gentiles or thieves, he is not culpable. But if he did it with a mind to spare the lamp, or spare oil, or spare the wick, he is culpable. Shabbat 2:5. That's actually the section of it called Shabbat, means Sabbath. Hundreds of very, very precise rules were found there. So they would know exactly how to keep the Sabbath and all of its commandments perfectly, or so they thought. Thousands of details like this would, not just for Sabbath, but every aspect of life, would fill the mind of the Pharisee. This was their religion. This was their worldview. This is how they saw things and considered the world from it. This was the lens with which they'd see Jesus. Constantly living by rules. They were rules that were created by men. Oh, their motives were good. They started with, how can we keep the law? That was the whole deal. They wanted to help people to be faithful to God. They themselves wanted to be faithful to God. But the product of their labor ended up taking all the joy out of the Sabbath and made the Sabbath itself a great deal of work to keep. Luther rightly described how one keeps the Sabbath with his explanation to the third commandment. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. What does this mean? We should fear and love God, that we do not despise preaching and his word, but hold it sacred and gladly hear and learn it. Really simple. Meanwhile, the Pharisees were fussing over how to light and extinguish candles and other such things. They were missing the whole point of Sabbath. Rather than resting in God, they were working like crazy to prove that they were righteous. Jesus once said to them in Mark 7, verse 6, "Well did the Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain," that's emptiness, "in emptiness do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men." That would be the Talmud and the Mishnah and the Pharisees' words. You leave the commandment of God and hold to the tradition of men. That clearly describes what they did with the Sabbath and many other things. Now, the Pharisees wouldn't have been so annoying if they would have just kept it to themselves and went off someplace and lived like this, but they didn't. They were strident. They thought it was how everybody should live, and they despised anybody who didn't live according to their rules. So they accosted this man who was healed on probably the happiest day of his life and informed them that he was living in outward rebellion against God. Now, it could be that they didn't know the man was healed, and his answer to them tends to reveal that. John 5:11-12. But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is this man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" So they didn't really see the healing happen. The man had to tell them about it. So they were not quite the heartless scoundrels on this occasion. And the man was ready to dump all the blame on Jesus. We would say all the credit on Jesus. He commanded him to take up his bed and walk, and that was the healing that took place. And that's what the Pharisees would call a bad thing. Just to be clear, there is nothing in the Bible that says that one can not carry his bed on the Sabbath day. That was a Pharisee rule. John 5:13-14. Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in that place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse would happen to you." Probably, I'm guessing, this guy went to the temple to give thanks for his healing. That would be the best guess why he was there. Jesus found him there and said, "You are well." In Greek, it's actually, "You're whole." It seems that Jesus understood the holistic that we think is all the rage right now in that way. You're whole. In other words, everything in your body is working. Now, we're a bit shocked that Jesus said, "Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." Later in his book, Jesus will repudiate the idea that physical disasters happen to one as God taking it out on you in real time with the blind man. So he clearly is not implying that the man's legs were payback from God for something that he did. However, he might have injured himself in doing something sinful, committing some crime. That's all unclear, though. Mostly, I think this comment was meant to help the man expand his thinking. Something much worse than paralysis is coming to those who do not believe. And the guy didn't even know who Jesus was. This is an interesting part about this healing, is that he didn't know Jesus. Most other healings, the people knew Jesus, but this guy didn't. We get a better picture of what kind of character this guy had in the next verse. John 5:15-16. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this is why the Jews persecuted Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. No, the man didn't have to do that. He could have just left the Jews with his earlier explanation and they'd be none the wiser, but he personally sought them out to tell them it was Jesus who had healed him. Now, why would he do that? This marked the beginning of hostility with the Pharisees. Why would he do that? Doesn't make sense to me. It's hard to figure this guy. And maybe because he had some prevalent sin that was controlling him. That usually is what makes people hard to figure. Something's going on. And Jesus saw that. And that's why he said, "Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." That's my best guess.